안녕하세요. 꾸준한 영어 테드쌤입니다. 오늘은 Invictus, 라틴어로 unconquerable, 정복될 수 없는 이라는 뜻을 가진 윌리엄 어니스트 헨리가 쓴 시를 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. 남아프리카 공화국의 넬슨 만델라 대통령, 최초의 흑인 대통령이죠. 넬슨 만델라 대통령이 가장 사랑했던 시이기도 하고 27년간의 옥중 생활에서도 의지를 잃지 않고 신념을 지킬 수 있게 도와준 시라고도 합니다. 그래서 이 인빅터스는 영화로도 제작이 되었고요. 많은 이들에게 힘과 용기를 주는 시로서 사랑받는 시라고 합니다. Invictus 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. Invictus by William Ernest Henley. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced, nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears, looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the ears finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishment the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. 너무 좋습니다. 시를 읽고 났더니 저희 꼭지가 또 제 낭독을 듣고 같이 읽자고 찾아왔습니다. 배꼽이 꼭지 인사하세요. 꼭지 오랜만이시죠? 시에 순간 제가 읽고 감동을 받았어요. 시 너무 좋다, 그죠? 네. 여러분들에게도 용기와 신념을 지킬 수 있는 희망의 줄기가 될 수 있는 그런 시가 되었으면 좋겠습니다. 자, 이번에는 이제 버니큐가 Chapter 2 낭독 이어가 보도록 하겠습니다. 자, 버니큐라 Chapter 2 Music in the Night. I feel at this time there are a few things you should know about Chester. No, 꼭지. He is not your ordinary cat. Yeah. But then, I'm not your ordinary dog, since an ordinary dog wouldn't be writing this book, would he? Chester came into the house several years ago as a birthday gift for Mr. Monroe, along with 2 volumes of Chesterton. 2 volumes of G.K. Chesterton, hence the name Chester, and the first edition of Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities. As a result of this introduction to literature, and given the fact that Mr. Monroe is an English professor, Chester developed a taste of reading early in life. I, on the other hand, have developed a taste for books. I found Jonathan Livingston Seagull particularly delicious. From Chester's kittenhood on, Mr. Monroe has used him as a sounding board for all his student lectures. If Chester doesn't fall asleep when Mr. Monroe is talking, the lecture can be counted a success. Every night, when the family is sleeping, Chester goes to the bookshelf, selects his midnight reading, and curls up on his favorite chair. He especially likes the mystery stories and the tales of horror and the supernatural. As a result, he has developed a very vivid imagination. I'm telling you this because I think it's important for you to know something of Chester's background before I relate to you the story of the events following the arrival of Bunnicula into our home. Let me begin with that first tonight. It seems that after I went to sleep, Chester, still stewing over the lost milk, settled down with his latest book and attempted to ignore the rumbling in his stomach. The room was dark and quiet. This did not prevent his reading, of course, since, as you know, cats can see in the dark. A shaft of moonlight fell across the rabbit's cage and spilled onto the floor below. The wind and the rain had stopped, and as a result, as Chester read Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher, he became increasingly aware of the eerie stillness that had taken their place. As Chester tells it, he suddenly felt compelled to look at the rabbit. "I don't know what came over me," he said to me the next morning, but a cold chill ran down my spine. The little bunny had begun to move for the first time since he had been put in his cage. He lifted his tiny nose and inhaled deeply, as if gathering sustenance from the moonlight. He slicked his ears back close to his body, and for the first time, Chester said, I noticed the peculiar marking on his forehead. What had seemed an ordinary black spot between his ears took on a strange V-shape, which connected with the big black patch that covered his back and each side of his neck. It looked as if he was wearing a coat. No more like a cape than a coat. Through the silence had drifted the strains of remote and exotic music. I could have sworn it was a gypsy violin. Chester told me. I thought perhaps a caravan was passing by, so I ran to the window. I remembered my mother telling me something about caravans when I was a puppy, but for the life of me, I couldn't remember what. What's a caravan? I asked. Feeling a little stupid, a caravan is a band of gypsies traveling through the forest in their wagons, Chester answered. Oh yes, it was coming back to me now. Station wagons? No, covered wagons. The gypsies travel all through the land, setting up camps around the great bonfires, doing magical tricks, and sometimes, if you cross their palms with a piece of silver, they will tell you a fortune. You mean if I gave them a fork, they'd tell my fortune? I asked, breathlessly. Chester looked at me with disdain. Save your silverware. He said it wasn't a caravan after all. I was disappointed. What was it? I asked. Chester explained that when he looked out the window, he saw Professor White, our next-door neighbor, playing the violin in his living room. He listened for a few moments to the haunting melody and sighed with relief. I've really got to stop reading these horror stories late at night, he thought. It's beginning to affect my mind. He yawned and turned to go back to his chair and get some sleep. As he turned, however, he was startled by what he saw. There in the moonlight, as the music filtered through the air, sat the bunny, his eyes intense and staring, an unearthly aura about them. Now, this is the part you won't believe, Chester said to me. But as I watched, his lips parted in a hideous smile, and where a rabbit's buck teeth should have been, two little pointed fangs glistened. I wasn't sure what to make of Chester's story, but the way he told it, it sent my hair on end. Chapter 3. Some unusual goings-on. The next few days passed uneventfully. I was very bored. Our new arrival slept all day, and Chester, whose curiosity had been aroused by the strange behavior of the rabbit that first night, had decided to stay awake every night to observe him. Therefore, he too spent most of his days sleeping, so I had no one to talk to. The evenings weren't much better. Toby and Pete, who used to play with me as soon as they got home from school, now ran immediately to that silly rabbit's cage to play with them. Or at least they tried to. But Nicola did not make a most energetic playmate. It took him quite a while to wake up each night, and then when he did awaken, he didn't do much except hop around the living room. He didn't play catch, he didn't fetch, he didn't roll over to get his tummy rubbed. I couldn't understand why they played with him at all. I expect it was because he was new and different, but I was confident that they would soon tire of him and come back to trusty old Harold. Finally, on the morning of the fourth day, I caught Chester bleary-eyed over the water dish. He grumbled at me in a most unpleasant manner. You know, Chester, you were never exactly charming in the morning, but lately you've become downright grumpy. Chester growled in response. What are you doing this for anyway? What are you looking for? He's just a cute little bunny. Cute little bunny. Chester was amazed at my character analysis. That's what you think. He's a danger to this household and everyone in it. Oh, Chester, I said, with an indulgent smile. I think your reading has gone to your head. Just because I read that, I know what I'm talking about. Well, what are you talking about? I still don't understand. I'm not sure yet, but I know there's something funny about that rabbit. That's why I have to keep alert. Look at you. You're exhausted. You sleep all the time. How can you call this alert? I'm awake when it's important. He sleeps all day, so I sleep all day. So just what have you seen since the first night that makes you uneasy? Well, said Chester, that is... At this point, Chester started to bathe his tail, which is a cat's way of changing a subject he finds uncomfortable. He then stumbled sleepily into the living room. So I asked again, following him. What have you seen? Nothing, he snapped, and proceeded to curl up on his chair to go to sleep. After a moment, he opened one eye. But that doesn't mean there's nothing to see. For the next few mornings, it was the same routine. I'd be ready for a good romp around the living room, and the Chester would go to sleep. Pete and Toby were at school. Mr. Morneau was at the university. He never did too much romping around anyway. And Mrs. Morneau was at her office. No one to play with a poor, neglected Harold. At first, I thought I could strike up a friendship with Nicola and maybe teach him a few tricks, but I could never wake him up. He was always waking up just about sunset when I wanted to take a snooze. A rabbit, I concluded, is cute to look at, but is generally useless, especially as a companion to dogs, so I would retire each day with my favorite shoe to the rag and chew. Now, some people, especially Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, can't understand my taste for shoes and yell at me for snacking on them, but I always say, there's no accounting for taste. For instance, I remember one evening when Mr. Monroe picked some of his sour balls out of the bowl by his chair and dropped a green one on the floor. He didn't notice as it rolled across the room and landed near my nose. I decided this was a perfect opportunity to try one for myself. I placed it in my mouth and wished immediately that I hadn't, as the tears started running out of my eyes. I thought, what's wrong with my mouth? It's turning inside out. Mr. Murner immediately noticed that something had happened. What the matter, Harold? Are you looking for something to kiss? Help, help! I wanted to cry, but all that came out was an ooh-ooh-ooh sound. I ooh-ooh-oohed for days. So how can anyone who likes the green owl balls criticize me for preparing a nice penny roper or a bedroom sleeper? But back to the matter at hand. One morning, Chester had news. That bunny, he whispered to me across our food bowls, got out of his cage last night. Don't be ridiculous, I said. How could he break through that wire? Look how little he is. That's just it. He didn't break through any wire. He got out of his cage without breaking anything or opening any doors. I looked puzzled. So Chester told me the following story. Now, Harold, he said, I don't want you thinking I'm not a good watch cat, but after a few hours last night, I grew curious about the time. I went into the hallway, and you know that new clock they've got? The big one that goes all the way to the ceiling. Well, see, it was this thing in the middle called a pendulum. At first I figured I would just leave it alone. It looked like that spool they tied on a string and hung from the doorknob for me to play with when I was a kitten. Every time I hit that silly spool with my paw, it would swing back and hit me on the nose. I hated that toy, so naturally, when I saw this one, I decided not to have anything to do with it. I checked the time. It was midnight. I was all set to go back to the living room when something stopped me. Curiosity? I ventured. I suppose you could call it that. I preferred to think of it as the challenge of the unknown. I put one paw over my nose and reached out with the other one and gave it one good smack. I darn near broke my arm. It's still tender. See how swollen it is. He showed me his little paw. I couldn't see anything wrong, but I knew better than to argue with him. So, oh yes, I said, that looks terrible. You must be suffering awfully. You'd better go east today. He limped dramatically, just far enough to display his new handicap, and continued. I couldn't even get to the pendulum. Somebody had put glass in front of it, and I was pretty mad. I was all set to go back, but at the same time, I couldn't help watching the thing move back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It was so easy to watch, and before I knew what had happened, I was waking up. You fell asleep? I asked incredulously. I couldn't help it. I didn't even know it had happened, but I looked up at the face of the clock, and it was 12:45. I'd been gone for I'd been gone 45 minutes. I'd been gone 45 minutes. I ran back into the living room, looked at Bunnicula's cage, and it was empty. I couldn't imagine where he was. Then I noticed a light coming from under the kitchen door. I went into a crouch. Striking the light went click. I heard that the refrigerator door closed, and the light went out. It must have been Mr. Murner having his midnight snack, I suggested. No, that's what I thought. I jumped on my chair, called a real quick, and kept one eye open, pretending to be asleep. Slowly, the door to the kitchen squawked open. The little head poked out from around the corner and looked to either side to see if the coast was clear. Then, guess who came bouncing out all by himself? And with that idiotic grin of his plastered all over his face? Well, I guess it wasn't Mr. Monroe, I said. Not unless he wears bunny pajamas and gets very tiny at night. Bunnicula? Huh? You got it. Unfortunately, I hadn't positioned myself so that I could see him get back into the cage. and I didn't want to let him know where I had seen anything, so I had to stay put. I still don't know how he got out or back in. At this point, Mr. Munro came downstairs to make breakfast. I wondered if Chatter hadn't dreamed the whole thing. He didn't admit he'd fallen asleep, and as I've said, he has quite an imagination. But I was game after all. There hadn't been any excitement in his place for days. Chatter and I took our positions under the kitchen table. We didn't have long to wait. Holy cow! Mr. Munro yelped as he opened the refrigerator door. He took his funny-looking white thing out of the fridge and held it at arm's length. "Peter, come down here." "What is that?" I whispered. "It's me," Chester answered. "It looks like a white tomato." "Very funny," I said as Pete came into the kitchen. "Peter, have you been playing with your chemistry set in here?" "No, Dad. Why?" "I thought that this might be one of your experiments. Do you know what it is?" "Gee, Dad, it looks like a white tomato." Just then, Mrs. Munro and Toby came in the door. "What's all the fuss about?" Mrs. Munro asked. "We were just trying to figure out what this is." Toby pulled it down so he could get a better look. "Well," he said, "it looks to me like a white tomato." Mr. Munro took a good long look. "You know," he said to his wife, "it really does look like a white tomato." "There's one way to find out," said Mrs. Munro, who always was the practical one. "Let's cut it open and see what's inside." Everybody gathered around the table. I jumped up on a chair, and in all the excitement, no one noticed that I had my paws on the table, which under normal circumstances was discouraged, to say the least. Chatter wasn't so lucky. "Chatter, get off the table," Mrs. Munro said. Chatter jumped onto Toby's shoulders. Willie stayed to view the proceedings. Mrs. Munro took her sharpest knife and cut cleanly through the thing. It fell into two halves. "It's a tomato, all right," said Mrs. Munro. Here are the seeds, but it's all white," Toby observed. "And the look," said Pete. "It's dry, so it is. So it is. So it is. So it is. So it is." Mr. Munro said as he picked up one of the halves. "There is no juice at all." "Well, and what do you think?" "It's gone bad, I guess, though. I've never heard of a tomato turning white before." "Come on," she said, clearing the table. "Let's throw it out and have breakfast. And Harold, get your paws off the table." "Rat!" Chatter jumped down from Toby's shoulders and motioned for me to follow him into the living room. "This had better be important," I said. "They are cooking bacon." "A white tomato, very significant," Chatter murmured. "So it's a white tomato," I said, edging my way back to the kitchen door. "What does that have to do with Bunnicula?" "I can tell you one thing," Chester said. "I got a good look at the tomato. There were very suspicious marks on the skin. So, I believe they are teeth marks. So tonight, I'm gonna reread a book I read last year." "How fascinating," I said as the aroma of frying bacon wafted across my nostrils. "And what book might that be?" "The Mark of the Vampire." "What?" I stopped dead in my tracks. "Meet me tonight, after the others have gone to sleep. You'd better take a nap today so you can stay awake." Chester closed his eyes. I shifted my look to Bunnicula, who seemed to be asleep in this cage. A tiny smile sat upon his lips. A happy dream, I wondered, or something else? My reverie was broken by the sound of crunching bacon. I was in the kitchen in a flash. Yes. 네, 오늘은 여기까지 하도록 하겠습니다.